Hello, we are going to be reading a new Greek myth today. So we're going to be reading the story of Cupid, who probably many of you have images in your head of Cupid being around Valentine's Day, shooting arrows, making people fall in love with each other. And that is pretty much based off of the true mythology of the god of Cupid. So we're going to find out about Cupid and Psyche, who is Cupid and Psyche is the name of this story. Now, there was a time long, long ago that Cupid himself lost his immortal heart to an earthly maiden, and this is how it came to pass. There was a certain king who had 3 lovely daughters. The older 2 married princes of wealth and fame, but the youngest, who was named Psyche, by the way, this is how Psyche is spelled with a silent P. No, that's confusing, but Cupid and Psyche, that's the way you say her name, was so radiantly beautiful, so strikingly attractive, that it seemed no man could ever be worthy of her. People used to gather in the streets just to see her pass by. They sang hymns in her praise, and some strangers even mistook her for Venus, who's the goddess of beauty. Now, this praise for the beauty of a mortal maiden, mortal means she can die, so she's not a god or goddess, she's just human. In time, it reached the very ears of Venus, high on Mount Olympus, and it angered the goddess so much that she vowed to punish her earthly rival. One day, she called her son, whose name was Cupid, and told him to sharpen his arrows for a very special mission. Cupid, you see, was a more dangerous archer than even mighty Apollo. For although Apollo's arrows could drain one's life's blood in an instant, a wound from Cupid's arrows would cause one to fall deeply in love. And that could mean a lifetime of joy, or it could also mean a lifetime of sorrow and grief if that love was not returned or shared. So this could be much worse than losing your life if love isn't returned. That's what they're saying. Avenge your mother, Venus commanded. Wound this mortal maid, Psyche, and make her fall in love with some poor and unmannered man who will treat her cruelly and torment her throughout all her days. That is a terrible wish. Venus wants Psyche to fall in love with somebody who's going to treat her terribly. Why does Venus want to do this? She is jealous of how much attention Psyche is getting. Now Cupid gathered and readied his weapons, and then, making himself invisible, flew down to earth and found Psyche asleep in her bedchamber. Cupid carefully touched her heart with the tip of his golden arrow of love, which caused Psyche to awaken suddenly with a start. She opened her beautiful eyes and looked right at Cupid, who forgot momentarily that he was invisible, and was so taken by the incomparable beauty of this mortal maid that he accidentally wounded himself with that same arrow. Now he is going to fall in love. He had inflicted upon himself, he quickly prepared a healing potion that would undo the effect of his arrows. And he poured this soothing vapor over her golden locks. So now she's not going to fall in love with a terrible person after all. Back to her dream, the princess went, unaffected by any thoughts of love. Cupid, now strangely not so light of heart, returned to the heavens, but he did not say a word of the events that had actually taken place that night. Venus waited several days and watched Psyche's every move from high above. But much to her dismay, she saw no sign whatsoever of Psyche's love for any mortal, rich or poor. So she decided to send down her own spell upon this unsuspecting princess. From that time on, lovely as Psyche was, not a suitor came to ask for her hand. Not a man in the kingdom, either high-born or low, tried to woo her, or win her smile, or attract even the slightest response from her. This sudden lack of interest in obtaining Psyche's favor made her parents quite concerned, for they so dearly wanted Psyche to marry a noble prince and to live a happy life. Now they wondered if she would ever marry at all. Thinking that her lonely situation might be the result of some offense that she had unwittingly given to the gods, some affront that had angered them into changing her fate. They took their daughter to the oracle of Apollo. Now, an oracle is like a wise person there. And they asked the oracle to give them advice and counsel. After some time, a voice from inside the temple spoke to them. The Princess Psyche shall never wed a mortal man. She must be given to him who waits for her on the top of yonder mountain, one against whom both gods and men are powerless. Who do you think it could be? Now, hearing this, her poor parents were distraught. They were so upset. And they gave themselves up to grief as they pictured the fate that was in store for their beloved princess. Surely there must be some sort of hideous monster awaiting her on the mountain, and she must now be delivered unto him. Only Psyche herself remained undismayed. She's like Isabel. Isabel, didn't worry. Isabel didn't care, didn't scurry. So she is unfazed by it. She says, we have angered Venus in some way, and now I must atone for that sin so that you and our kingdom will be allowed to prosper once more. It is the will of the gods, and so we must obey. Wow, she's got a great attitude to say, this is what the gods will, I'm going to go along with it. At last, her parents consented and preparations were made for Psyche to be delivered to and wed to whoever or whatever awaited her on the mountain. The royal maid took her place in the procession that wound its way up, and when they reached the very top, they left her there, alone. Full of courage but in secret fear, she watched her people proceed down the mountain path, weeping for her fate, too sad to look back. Only when they were out of sight, then did she weep, and her tears ran like raindrops down her cheeks. So she is scared, she's frightened, she just didn't want to show it. But now a sudden breeze drew near and dried her tears and caressed her hair, seeming to murmur comfort to her. It was Zephyr, the gentle west wind, who had come to befriend her. He lifted her up in his arms, and he carried her up and over the crest of the fateful mountains, and into a valley below. There he left her, resting on a bank of lush grass, and there she fell asleep. When she awoke, it was near sunset. She looked about her for some time of the monster's approach, but she heard and saw nothing unusual. Nothing, that is, until she peered through a clump of nearby bushes and saw, much to her amazement, the most magnificent castle her eyes had ever beheld. Its golden pillars supported a high, arching roof. Its walls of purest silver and walkways, inlaid with precious gems, reflected the light of the setting sun. There was no lock or chain on the great doorway, and there was no guard to stop her from entering, which she did. As she gazed in awe at the splashing fountains and the marbled hallways, a sweet and comforting voice spoke to her, saying, "Do not fear, gentle princess, for all that you see is yours. Many servants await your every wish. Lie down now and rest. Your bath is being prepared, and a feast will follow." And indeed, for the next several days, Psyche's smallest requests were immediately answered. She was waited upon by unseen spirits and sung to by invisible choirs, and every night she heard the soothing voice of the man to whom she had been given, although she never beheld his form. So she can hear him, she just has never seen him still. Who do you think it is? Let's see. Now, only after sunset would he come to her, and his voice, the beautiful voice of a god, would inspire her to trust her strange destiny and to believe in his absolute love for her. Often, she begged him to stay with her through the day, so that she might see his face. But this he would not grant. "Never doubt me, dearest Psyche," he would say. "Perhaps you would fear me if you saw my form, and your love is all I ask. There is a reason that I must remain hidden for now. Trust me and believe." Surely, thought Psyche, this spirit, whom the oracle had called her husband, was no monster. But what was he? He remained unseen. These questions haunted the princess, even as she partook of all the pleasures of her new surroundings. And she thought of her dear parents, who were, no doubt, mourning her loss at the hands of some cruel beast. And she missed the company of her two sisters, who were suffering the life of mere mortals while she lived as a goddess. Now one night she told her husband of these regrets and begged that her sisters at least might come to visit her. He sighed, but did not refuse her. "Zephyr shall bring them here," said he. And on the following morning, swift as a bird, the west wind came over the crest of the high mountain and down into the enchanted valley, bearing her two sisters. They greeted Psyche with joy and amazement, hardly knowing how they had come to be where they were. But when she led them through her palace and showed them all the treasures that were hers, envy and bitterness arose in the hearts of the sisters. They asked 1,000 questions, hoping to find some flaw in her good fortune. Sadly, this is often true of people who have the wrong mindset. If somebody has something nice, instead of being happy for them, they try to find something wrong with it to make them feel better. So when Psyche finally had to confess that she had never seen her husband, they laughed at her steadfast faith, saying, "Have you forgotten what the oracle decreed, that you would be given to a creature that overcomes both gods and men? Are you so deceived by this show of kindliness that you are blind to his evil intent? Be warned, dear sister, your husband is some sort of dragon who feeds you well for the present so that he may feast upon you someday soon. Trust not his words, but see for yourself. Some night when the monster is asleep, light a lamp and take with you a sharp dagger. Then you can put him to death, and all his riches will be yours and ours." Now, Psyche thinks highly of this husband of hers, even though she's never met him. She has some doubts. Now her sisters, they are saying all of these things not to protect Psyche. Why are they saying it? Because they're jealous. They want riches for themselves, and they don't want Psyche to be happy. They want to be able to have more joy and riches on their own. They can't be happy for her, sadly. So after the sisters had gone, Psyche brooded over what they had said, not seeing their evil intent. Little by little, suspicion ate at her, like a moth, until one night, in shame and fear, she hid a lamp and dagger in her bedchamber. Toward midnight, when her husband was fast asleep, up she rose, hardly daring to breathe, and coming to uncovered the lamp in order to see the monster's face. But there before her, in the light of the lamp, the youngest of the gods lay sleeping. It was Cupid himself, the most beautiful, the most irresistible of all the immortals. His hair shone golden as the sun. His face was radiant as springtime, and from his shoulders sprang two wings showing all the colors of the rainbow. Poor Psyche was overcome with fear, love, and guilt. Her hands trembled as she turned to quench her lamp, but as she did so, some of its burning oil fell upon the shoulders of fair Cupid, awakening him with a start. He opened his eyes to see his bride and the dark suspicion in her heart. To be suspicious means you think the worst in somebody else. She did not trust Cupid. "Oh, doubting Psyche," he said, "is this how you repay my love? After having disobeyed my mother's command and taken you for my wife, I had so hoped that your faith would be as constant as my love. Excuse me. But I see that you find your sister's advice preferable to mine, and so I must leave you forever. Love can never dwell where there is suspicion." So poor Psyche, she had these doubts, especially after hearing from her sisters. And so Cupid cannot stay with her because she doubts him. And so saying, he seized his bow and quiver, unfurled his wings, and flew away out the open window. Psyche tried to follow him and explain to him and apologize for the doubts that she had had. But she could not fly, and so she tumbled to the ground in a daze. When her senses returned, she stared about her and saw that she was alone. The palace and gardens had vanished, and the valley was beautiful no longer. From that moment, she began to wander day and night throughout many lands, seeking her beloved Cupid and a chance to make amends for her faithlessness. To make amends means she's trying to win him back and prove to him that she does love him. Meanwhile, Cupid lay in his mother's chamber, wounded not only by the burning oil, but more seriously by his own arrow of love, which had pierced his heart when he first beheld the loveliness of Psyche. Now Venus grew exceedingly angry with her son for having fallen in love with this unworthy mortal maid. But she was still more angry with the maid herself for causing Cupid to be so sick at heart. And Venus would have destroyed poor Psyche on the spot had not stopped her and declared her judgment that the pair had now had committed no evil. They had merely fallen in love and were now suffering as lovers often do. Hearing this, Venus returned to care for her son, but she harbored still a deep resentment for the Princess Psyche. After wandering long and far without success, Psyche decided to seek the forgiveness of Venus and submit to whatever punishment or penance Venus might demand. She presented herself at the goddess's temple and asked to be allowed to serve in any way she could. As Psyche knelt, sobbing, at the entrance, the beautiful Venus herself appeared, but wearing a most angry look. "Have you come to see your husband, whom you so cruelly wounded, and whose love you so heartlessly cast aside?" the goddess asked. "Well, we shall see whether through your cleverness and hard work you can earn the right to take your apology to him." So saying, she led Psyche to a large storehouse filled with great quantities of wheat, barley, beans, and many other seeds and grains as well, all mingled together into one immense heap. "Separate these, grain by grain and seed by seed," Venus commanded, "so that each kind is in a pile of its own, and see to it that you are finished by nightfall." Then Venus departed, and Psyche sank to her knees in tears, knowing that such a task would be impossible, even for the mighty Hercules. What Psyche didn't know, however, was that Cupid was watching over her, still as ardently in love with her as ever. From the corner of her eye, she began to see a moving black thread that seemed to emerge and crawl from a crevice in the storehouse wall. Bending nearer to investigate, she saw that it was a great army of ants in columns that had come to her aid. Wow! Now, the industrious little creatures worked so rapidly and so diligently that even before the last light streaked the evening sky, all the grains and seeds were separated, and the impossible task was completed. When Venus saw that the storehouse had been completely transformed just as she had requested, she knew that Psyche must have had some divine help. And she became even more determined to make the mortal princess suffer for the way she had treated Cupid. On the next morning, she ordered Psyche to gather some wool from each of the ferocious rams with golden fleece that grazed in a nearby grove. We're going to find out more about this golden fleece in another story in a couple weeks. So these are ferocious rams. It's very difficult to wrangle them and get the wool from them. Not just some of the golden wool, mind you, but some from each ram. Else Psyche must return to her family out. Much less did she know how she would overcome the sharp horns and gnashing teeth that awaited her on the other side. And once again she wept in despair. But Cupid persuaded the river god to help her in her quest, and soon she was carried across the treacherous waters and instructed to pick the golden wool not from the rams themselves, but from the bushes and briars that had touched the coats of all the rams as they passed by. Very clever. Now, once again, Venus became enraged when Psyche returned, her arms full of the shining fleece. I know very well that it is not by your own doing that you've succeeded in these tasks, the goddess fumed. But whoever is aiding you against me will be of no help to you this time. Here, take this box and make your way into the underworld. There you are to find Proserpine, and say to her, my mistress Venus asks that you send a little of your beauty to her, for she has lost some of her own in caring for her injured son. So she's supposed to go down to the underworld, which is where Hades is. So she's supposed to get this little box. Now, Psyche, let us see if your wits are the match for this challenge. So she thinks this is going to really be the true challenge that Psyche will not live up to. Psyche was certain now that her destruction was near, for she knew well that mortals did not venture into Hades and return to earth alive. And so it was in utter despair that she climbed a high cliff and prepared to kill herself by jumping from its edge. But a soothing voice whispered in her ear, I know your grief, dear Psyche, but listen to me, and you will learn a safe way to make your journey and return. The gentle voice went on to tell her how one might avoid all the dangers of Hades and come out unscathed. Just be sure, added the voice, that when Proserpine has returned the box, you do not open it. That's what's important. Do not open this box, however much you may long to do so. Psyche listened well and followed every step the voice had told her, and before long had made her way safely into Hades and into the palace of its king and queen. She made her errand known to Proserpine, who complied with her request. And soon Psyche found herself in the upper world again, wearied but hopeful. But I am so worn with toil, she lamented, that my appearance will no longer be pleasing to my husband. I have come so close to seeing him again, and surely Venus cannot need all the beauty I have brought back in this box. And since it is only to please my beloved husband, it might be right for me to take just a little. She was told specifically, do not open this. So saying, she carefully opened the box. Poor Psyche should have known that the spells and potions of Hades are not for mortal maidens. No sooner had she inhaled the strange aroma that was emitted than she fell down in the middle of the road, without sense or motion, quite overcome with the deepest sleep. Now it happened that Cupid had recovered from his wound, and he could no longer endure the absence of his beloved Psyche. He slipped unnoticed from his chamber and flew to the spot where she lay. He gathered up the potions and spells that had escaped and sealed them again in the box. Dearest Psyche, he said, your curiosity has once again led you near to ruin, but the power of my love will save you. And he knelt beside her and kissed her cheek. As if from a dream, Psyche awoke and found herself beautiful once again. Take the box to my mother as she commanded you, Cupid said, and I will take care of the rest. He spread his rainbow wings once again, and Psyche watched him fly until he was far out of sight. He continued on and up until he reached the heights of Mount Olympus, where all the gods sat feasting, and he begged them to calm his mother's anger and hatred for Psyche. They heard his story, and their hearts were touched. The mighty Jupiter himself lent a favoring ear, and, shortly thereafter, called Venus to him and persuaded her to accept Psyche as one of her own. Mercury was dispatched to bring the mortal maid up to Olympus, and there she was offered ambrosia and nectar on which to feast. Take these, Jupiter said, and become immortal, nor shall Cupid ever be apart from you again. Psyche consumed all that she was given, and thereby became a goddess. Cupid took her by the hand, and they remained together forever. So, a lot happening in that story, of pulling up some questions to ask about it. So a couple of lessons from this story. It seems as if Cupid, he really did think he could not love Psyche if she was going to doubt him. And I think that's very true, that people can't really love each other if there's doubts and suspicions there. And Psyche did prove herself later on, even though she disobeyed by opening this box. The story has a happy ending. Yeah, she becomes an immortal goddess so that she can live there forever with Cupid. We don't know how often she'll see her immortal family on Earth anymore. But in general, this is a happy story with a happy ending. Now, a few extra words about this story. Psyche in Greek means soul. And this is how we get the word psychology, psychiatric, psychoanalysis, all of these words that have to do with the mind and looking into mental processes. But thinking of psyche, you can always remember that there's that silent P in front of it. It says a lot of people misspell that one, but if you remember the silent P in psyche, that could help you. Now, in this myth too, we find out that they go to an oracle, Psyche's parents do. The word oracle comes from a Latin word that means to speak. That's how we get the word oral and orator, like our oral analysis or choral response. It's similar to that. Now, the priestess at an oracle would often go into a swoon or trance, thereby allowing the god to speak through her and reveal the future. So that's the story of Cupid and Psyche. I think that's a really enjoyable one. We're going to continue reading more myths having to do with the gods and goddesses from now on. We're going to read the story of Pegasus next week. Okay, I will talk to you all later. I hope that you enjoy the rest of your day, the short day that we have today. Bye.